mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism, or parasitism. Basically, mutualism as a symbiosis is something that a interaction that both organisms will get a benefit. So it's something that is mutually beneficial to both organisms that are interacting together. Whereas commensalism is something that is beneficial to one species, but the other is completely neutral. It doesn't cause any negative impacts, but it also doesn't give them any real benefit. And the third, parasitism. We know a parasite is something that is usually detrimental to its host organism. So this has one big benefit to the parasite, and then the host organism obviously is having negative consequences. But we also have two other sort of umbrella terms of symbiosis, and that's obligate and facultative. So obligate symbiosis is something whereby an interaction, both organisms require that symbiosis to survive. Without the other organisms, they would die. And there's a few examples that we'll talk about throughout the lecture. Facultative, on the other hand, is where both organisms get a benefit. It really makes sense for them to be interacting and working together, but they can survive regardless of being separated from another there. So symbiosis, it's a really important interaction in the animal kingdom, and especially in the marine world. There's a lot of symbiosis that occurs on coral reefs. It can tell us a great deal about organisms and their place in the ecological system. So this can tell us their ecological role, but also what kind of threats that they are subject to, as we spoke about in the first of the behavioural ecology lectures. We can identify what sort of threats there are to species. If you lose one, what will happen to the other? Observing symbiosis can also tell us a great deal about the evolution of behaviours, as well as sort of the resources that these organisms need to survive and the value of that resource. So resources being food, space, substrate for things like coral and sponge to attach to. These are obviously things that are quite limited in the marine environment, and we really get to understand the value of each resource underwater. So I mentioned that we have facultative versus obligate symbiosis. Now both of these can be really important in their own right. But does forming an obligate symbiotic relationship automatically mean that that organism has more benefits? By being an obligate symbiotic relationship, it means that if you do not have the other organism in your vicinity, in your environment, then you will die. So that naturally you think, okay, there might be some negative sides to that, in that you're a lot more risk of losing your symbiotic partner. And also, how can we test this? How can we test the advantages and disadvantages of obligate versus facultative symbiosis? So there was a really interesting study looking at two very common and inconspicuous things that we see on the reef. And I'm sure you've all seen this before, but maybe not paid too much close attention to it. And that's the prawn goby and various different species of shrimp that live together in the sand in a hole. And you might see them side by side, or one of them kind of more further in, tucked away in the hole. And basically, these guys have a symbiotic relationship in that one of them has really bad eyesight, so it can't see predators. The other one is a very hard worker and keeps the burrow clean, and also happens to have quite a nasty weapon in the shape of a claw. So with this, we have two different species here, okay? And one of these species, it doesn't matter which one for the sake of this, but one of these species has an obligate symbiosis, meaning that the loss of the other organism will result in it dying. The other has a facultative symbiosis, so it can live on its own, but it takes benefit from having the other organism present in its environment. So this study investigated predator avoidance behaviours from obligate shrimps that live beside their goby. And what it basically found was that obligate individuals, so shrimps that need to live with their goby in order to survive, stay closer to their burrows at all times. So they very rarely ventured outside of a small territory outside of that burrow, compared to those of facultative. Facultative were quite happy to move about when there was no threat. Obligate individuals also had a much greater flight response, meaning if we as divers got nice and close, the response of the obligate shrimp would be a much faster reaction to get back inside that burrow. So they were a lot more scared of the environment than the facultative. The facultative would kind of sit there potentially for longer and not really mind what comes their way. After this threat, obligate individuals also remained in their burrows for a much longer period of time. So they really were quite scared to come back out and start living their life. And what we can tell from this is that obligate individuals, although they might be slightly more conservative and safe from threats, they have a huge amount, a less amount of time to forage and find mates and live their lives, things they need to do as shrimps. So that's very much a disadvantage. If you can't get out and you can't forage, you can't find food, you can't find mates, you can't do things on the outside of the burrow that you might need to, then you're at a much greater risk of not really fulfilling what you need to get your energy. Facultative individuals, they don't have to worry about this disadvantage. They're able to move around their burrows. They're not as scared. However, there is this trade-off. If you're not scared, you're more likely to be eaten. But with this example, so there's obviously a trade-off between the advantages and disadvantages of both. But with the obligate shrimp, although we say there's quite a big disadvantage with not being too scared and not being able to move very far from this symbiotic goby or its partner, there must be some really, really significant advantages that the partner is giving the shrimp. These are things that we might not be able to see. They might just be things inside the burrow that we are not able to observe. At the moment, these are still questions that are kind of unanswered. This could be to do with brooding, so it could be that the partner organism is actually helping to brood the eggs and keep them safe, or with water circulation. It could be to do with feeding, in that there might be scraps, they might be sharing nutrition. We're not sure, but it definitely seems that there is a big, big advantage that we cannot see to being an obligate partnership. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it, because there are all of these issues with the obligate symbiosis. So this would also explain the evolution of obligate relationships. Why would you need to be that dependent on an individual if it means that you might not be able to survive? You might be at risk of dying without your partner, being reliant on that interdependence. But there must be a really big advantage. So that's something that it still remains to be seen, but a great example of this trade-off between facultative and obligate symbiosis. So symbiosis exists in a big range of organisms. Most famously is in coral, just coral that we see on the reef, hard coral, belonging to a group called Scleractinia. That basically just means skeleton, which is hard corals that builds the reef. Now this is a great example of both obligate and facultative symbiosis. Inside the tissue of the coral, here, we have very, very tiny algae cells. They're called dinoflagellates, and this is a particular dinoflagellate algae known as zooxanthellae. Zooxanthellae, being an algae, photosynthesizes. So this is living inside the tissue of the coral, and it's photosynthesizing and giving a huge amount of energy resource to the coral to survive. In fact, zooxanthellae provides up to, and actually probably more than, 90% of the coral's energy resource. And that's why when we see coral bleaching, coral bleaching is when the coral individual is expelling that zooxanthellae. Mostly it's assumed to be like the human immune response. When we get sick, we want to get rid of those cells. It's very similar. When it gets too hot and too productive, the coral flushes those algae cells out and it bleaches. It doesn't have that symbiotic algae anymore. But what happens is that that coral will then starve. Even though it has 10% of its energy resource from collecting plankton through its tentacles, this is not enough to survive, and that coral will die. So for the coral, this symbiotic relationship is very much obligative. It will die without the algae. On the other hand, the dinoflagellar algae, the zooxanthellae, this is a facultative symbiosis because it exists everywhere in the water as plankton and it is quite happy to survive on its own. So it just shows that symbiosis doesn't need to be the same type for the relationship between the individuals. It can be both at the same time. So this is a great example of both obligate and facultative symbiosis. Coral and other cnidaran, so coral-like organisms, also have other symbiotic relationships. So here we have another facultative symbiotic relationship. This is a coral and a porcelain crab. This porcelain crab was actually taken at Richelieu Rock, so this is something that we can look out for on our dives. And this is a really interesting symbiotic relationship. For the crab, the coral offers protection. Predators can't really easily get within the branches of the table coral. It's really well protected, so well protected that the photographers here probably can't get a very good photo either because it's so difficult to get inside those little gaps. So the crab has a massive advantage of being inside the coral, although it could survive outside. The coral actually gets a really, really important benefit too. So the crab is constantly cleaning small invertebrates that are potentially feeding on the mucus, which might weaken the coral, and cleaning, but also warning off potential predators. So I've mentioned a few times the crown of thorns starfish. These are guys that eat coral, and one of their favourite corals are table corals called Acropora. When there's been massive outbreaks of crown of thorns on a reef, and it's completely decimated the reef in Australia in the Great Barrier, you can see vast expanses of white scars left from coral predation where it's been consumed. But within those white scars, there will be jewels of perfectly untouched coral. And the reason that these corals have been left is because they have these crabs living inside. And what they're doing is when the crown of thorns or other potential predators are coming to consume, they're snipping at the legs. And the crown of thorns don't like that, so they will leave that coral. So these are really, really important for the coral in terms of survival from things like predation. So both the crab and the coral here are getting a benefit, and it's a facultative symbiosis. Now I also mentioned the other three types of symbiosis. So we have mutualistic, which the coral crab was a good example of as well. But then we also have commensalism and parasitism, which can also be both at the same time too. So these are great examples of things that you can see on night dives, but also at the moment with the amount of lion's mane jellyfish, we can see them on the surface of pretty much every dive. We can see commensalism happening all the time. Commensalism is basically when, like I said, there is a benefit to one organism and the other is completely neutral. No harm, no benefit. And here we can see in this is a rhizome jellyfish. Don't know what jellyfish this is, but you can see that there are small post-larval fish living within the tentacles and the head of this jellyfish. This is just there for protection. They're hitching a ride off the jelly, they're using it as protection to hide away as they develop, and it's not causing any harm to the jellyfish. It's purely just a taxi. Obviously this is a benefit to the fish, but no harm to the jelly. So look out for this on our blackwater dives. We can see that in a range of different things, not just jellies, but also like salps and cone jellies too. Parasitism, on the other hand, is something that directly negatively impacts the host organism. So we have a salp here. A salp is something that is quite often mistaken for a jellyfish, but is actually a chordate. And believe it or not, through all the invertebrates that we have in the animal kingdom, from jellyfish to sea cucumbers, crabs, This weird thing here is what humans are most closely related to. It's the birth of the nerval cord in all animals. And although this is not a great example, take away the shrimp, the way you can look at this is like human embryonic development. It's very similar to us in the womb. But inside this cell, we have a phrenoma, a species of, or a larval shrimp species on a black water that I've actually taken out here as well. Now this shrimp eats the guts of the cell and then latches inside with its claws and then uses this as both protection but as a mean of transport. So when it's just chilling or hiding, it will have this cell over its whole body, and then when it wants to go somewhere, it puts it out like a DPV and then catches a ride with the current until something scares it and puts it back. But this is definitely a parasite, and I mean it looks like it as well. It's a pretty alien looking thing, eating out the guts inside the cell there. But you can see on the outside some small arthropod, isopod, living on the outside. This is a form of commensalism. So these guys are not doing any harm, they're just hitching around. So look out for these on our dives as well. Just a nice little example of the interactions between these symbiosis. In this one photo, we have many different types of symbiosis. We have an anemone that is benefiting from the clownfish in a mutualistic symbiosis. Both the anemone and the clownfish are getting a benefit from this. But you can see inside here, there is a parasitic organism, a tongue-eating isopod, which will eat the tongue of the clownfish and then live there for the rest of its life, feeding on what the clownfish eats. So this is like an inception of symbiosis here, anemone, clownfish, isopod. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about this as well, something that we probably all have seen, know about a little bit, but it's a really interesting example of symbiosis on the reef. Although it's not strictly, it is symbiosis, but by the definition, you could argue that it isn't. But I'm going to talk about it because it's a great example of benefiting two species. So, cleaner fish, this is actually shameless plug as well, probably the only nice photo I've ever taken in my life, this grouper here. You can see the blue streak cleaner wrasse here on the outside, cleaning dead skin, parasites, cleaning injuries that are on the grouper, and they are basically the dentists and dermatologists of the ocean. They go and give spa treatments to other fish. But what's actually now being known about these cleaner fish is that they don't necessarily exclusively want this mucus. They're actually, parasites, what they really want is mucus, the mucus from the skin being excreted. But to get this, they actually need to bite the flesh of the organism, which is not very comfortable to the fish that the clients. And studies have actually shown something called cheating behaviour. So this cheating behaviour is basically where the blue streak or any cleaner wrasse will give a 5-star service to the small rabbit fish or things that are coming into the cleaning station, while the big grouper or the manta is looking on waiting for its turn. It will give a 5-star service, no biting, off you go. The bigger organism will then come in, and the cleaner fish will then do a good job, and then every so often bite the organism and take that mucus. The reason it's doing this is because the mucus is really highly nutritious, and for the females when they're brooding or spawning, they're looking to get or to maximise the amount of nutrition that they can get from this job. So during breeding and brooding season, what we'll see is this cheating behaviour from the cleaner wrasse. Now it's done this very, very tactically. It's not done this enough to actually warn off its clients. The clients have never associated the cleaning with pain or uncomfort. As far as they know, it's just an accident and it's something they will keep returning to. But it's a really, really smart way for the cleaner wrasse to maximise their nutritional value. Now it's worth noting as well that the cheating goes the other way. Every so often, this guy is just going to get annoyed and eat one of the cleaner wrasse. But again, it doesn't happen enough for the cleaner wrasse to be like, no, I don't want to go near you. Really, really interesting thing that you can see on the dives, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the communication of cleaning stations tomorrow, I think, so we'll hold on to that. Something else to look out for with the cleaner wrasse. I don't know if you guys know or have seen these, but there's actually cleaner wrasse mimics. Small, they're slightly smaller, slightly darker, more of like a royal blue with a very dark blue underneath. And these guys do not clean. They exclusively bite the clients. And they're just taking advantage of the cleaner wrasses or the trust that other organisms have for cleaner wrasse, and they are mimicking this behaviour. And I think this is like a really, really cool example of this biomimicry that we're seeing throughout the animal kingdom, and that must have taken a very, very long time to evolve to fill the niche that the cleaner wrasse are doing, but actually take advantage of this behaviour. So look out for both the mimic wrasse and the cool. So a few takeaway points for today. Symbiosis occurs in many, many forms on the reef, and is actually way more common under the water than it is on land. We can see many examples on every single dive, whether we can see them or we can assume them. So every single coral that we see, symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae. Even giant clams have a symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae. Anemones have a symbiotic relationship with the clownfish and the anemone fish that inhabit it. Prawn gobies get protection. Sometimes this is obligate, sometimes this is facultative, but always provides a benefit. And finally, cleaner fish, something that we see every dive, and we can look out for this cheating behaviour. I think I've actually seen it a couple of times. It's hard to know, but you might see a fish getting cleaned and suddenly it sort of recoils away like something wasn't quite right with that particular clean. And when we come to our black water dives as well, we can see commensalism and parasitism really, really up close and with some proper alien species. So it's a great way to see this commensalism. So yeah, look forward to that too. Thank you very much, guys. Anyone got any questions?
Thank you.
If you liked this video, click here to see more like it. Please follow us on social media and feel free to like and share.